You're listening to Parents You've Got This, the expert guide to parenthood, the complete guide to fertility, pregnancy, birth, baby and parenthood. This podcast is proudly supported by Mistela, a natural origin skincare for babies and children, recommended by healthcare professionals. Mistela by Parents' Side since 1950.
Trauma is a really difficult topic to talk about. Even the word trauma evokes in many of us quite a physical reaction, let alone an emotional reaction or a psychological reaction. Trauma can be emotional, it can be physical, it can be psychological, and it is no wonder that 80% of mental health issues can stem from some sort of unprocessed trauma. It can be something little, it can be something big, and it can be something everywhere in between. And as people, as parents, we are often navigating trauma in ways that we feel completely inequipped. So we have brought in an expert today to share all of her information and advice with us so that we can all navigate the traumas that we are carrying and feeling a little bit better.
We're so incredibly lucky that we have Liv Downing, a registered psychologist, a mindfulness and meditation expert, and she's also a children's author. She's very, very qualified. So we're in luck to hear all about trauma today. Thank you for joining us, Liv.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So I just want to start out talking about trauma as a whole. What does it mean, trauma?
Super question. We have to start with the definition of it. What is trauma? And often we think trauma is a thing that happens, but actually trauma is about what happens inside of us in response to the events. So Gabor Mate, who would be considered one of the world's experts when it comes to trauma, in addition to me, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. He says trauma is not what happened to you, it's what happened inside of you.
Oh, I love that.
And so it's about the psychological and the physiological response to life's stresses, life's challenges.
So Liv, can you give us an example of some different types of trauma?
Yeah, this is really important because when we talk about trauma, typically us average folk, we think that none of us have experienced it because we think trauma is really only those big life events like a car crash or an earthquake or, something else significant. But what we call that in psychology is big T trauma. They're the big life events, but there's also little t trauma, which is has just as much of an impact on us as individuals, and that is the smaller chronic stresses that can happen throughout our lives. So they're things like an overly critical parent, an overly critical spouse, long-term work stress, just long-term health difficulties. So they're some examples of different types of traumas.
Yeah, wow. And then, so how does trauma affect our mental health?
Great question. So I think the best way to answer that is with some research. So one of the most significant studies done in the 90s out of the US by an American health insurance company was called the ACEs study. And ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Events. And through that study, they basically found that the more ACEs, the more adverse childhood events that we have, the more likely we are to experience mental health issues.
Wow.
So it was the stats, the 80% is the stat that's probably from that study that you shared, Freya. And there are things like a parent with a mental illness, significant mental illness, an incarcerated parent, divorce and separation can be considered that. So it has a huge impact on what happens in our lives. Yeah.
Liv, what is a normal way to feel after a traumatic event?
Good question. Now, normal is everything, right? We're all so different. We are all put together so differently. And our response to trauma is going to be based on so many things. It'll be based on our genetics, so our nature. Did you know that we can inherit trauma from previous generations?
Absolutely, yes.
And so the research tells us that we can be living the trauma of our great-grandmothers or great-grandfathers.
Wow.
So it goes 3 generations in humans, 7 generations in rats. Wouldn't want to be a rat.
Glad I'm not a rat.
Not a rat.
For many reasons, but now,
Yes,
yeah.
a graphic designer actually told me this study the other day. It is completely fascinating.
Was it about the
smell?
The cherry smell?
Yes.
Yeah, fascinating, isn't it?
Tell it quickly, sorry, now that I've said it.
Yeah.
So basically these rats had to smell this smell over and over and over again. It traumatised them. And then it found that
I think they were given an electric shock with the smell.
And then the kids of the rats even this mere smell, that's right,
created the stress response.
of feeling that they're getting electric shock.
And that happened for 7 generations. Isn't that phenomenal? And so that happens with humans. Like, we carry this genetics in our bones, in our body. There's a great book called It Didn't Start With You, all about that. So there's the genetics. There's also the early childhood experiences and the way we're wired. When we're born, we have an underdeveloped nervous system, and we borrow the nervous system of our parents. So if we have a caregiver who has a dysregulated nervous system, there's a high chance that our nervous system is going to be dysregulated because we're borrowing theirs for the first 3 or 4 years of our life.
Wow.
Oh, wow, this explains a lot. Sorry, Mum and Dad.
Yeah.
I hear
you, sister. I hear you. I'm right there with you. Don't worry. The good news is we can heal, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And so we bring to our experiences not only our genetics, our wiring, but also our nurture, our early childhood experiences. And based on that will predict our response to whatever happens, which is why we can never compare traumas. You know, when you think, if someone loses their job and they fall in an absolute heap, and we lose our job and we're fine with it, but it's because we're all bringing our own story to the scenario. So trauma is layered. It's layered, and for some of us, we hold it together, and then something happens, and it tips us over into, and you ask what we might see, what some of the responses might be, and it might be things like disassociation, so not really feeling like we're in our body, confusion, typically anxiety and depression, not obviously, but I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, which can look at things like sleeplessness and flashbacks. But the cool thing is there's also post-traumatic growth that we can experience as well. Yes. So we can grow from these experiences, and our children can grow from these experiences. So for all of us as parents, there's trauma, right? Our kid, it's life. It's the life of a modern human. But we have to work with the Goldilocks principle. Our kids need just enough stress, just enough challenge, not too much and not too little.
Yeah, and it's true. Trauma can make you the person that you are, and it can be incredible. Like having a horrible childhood or something terrible happen to you can then potentially make you really passionate about a cause.
Correct.
And help lots of people through that trauma.
Yes.
But when you're talking about trauma there, it makes me think that trauma is different for everybody, as you were saying, but also then if it is trauma for someone, that is real. You know how sometimes people sort of say, like, that wasn't a traumatic, why are they behaving that way when you were talking about the differentness? And I think a lot of when something's trauma happens to a person, it's the acknowledgement, really, that you need to feel.
It's the validation, and it's about meeting ourselves where we are and meeting the person we love where they are. And, it brings to mind an example for me. A couple of years ago, I was given some negative feedback. I'd posted something on social media about something, and a colleague called me and said, "Liv, what you did was not okay." And I went into full shutdown. I burst into tears, and I was like, what is going on? And I realised that was the kind of feedback I used to get periodically through my childhood, just from, different caregivers. Yes. And it was as an adult, I could look at it and say, get it together, sister. That was just a bit of feedback, be strong. But actually, what I needed at that time was just care, validation, to be nurtured, to be held, and then I moved through it with more ease rather than being trapped and stuck.
Oh, it's so true. And I think Freya actually sent me this awesome video on social media. We'll have to find it and post it. But basically it was showing this person that had trauma. Imagine trauma is like a wound that is there, always there. And then, you put something over the top of it, but it's still there. And maybe someone brushes past it.
Yeah. And that's when we get
really
triggered.
Hurt.
Yes.
But they've got no idea.
They don't know.
Like your colleague had no idea that she was doing that to you, but that wound was there.
Yeah. And so it's not our fault. This is a really key message for your listeners, that our response to trauma is not our fault. It goes back previous generations or to the early days, but it absolutely is our responsibility to do something about it, to manage it as best we can. And there's so many ways we can do that now. And, modern medicine is catching up with the wisdom of the ancient traditions, like the yogis and the meditation experts. And so that's really exciting.
So, Liv, I wanted to talk to you a bit more about that. So when we feel trauma in our body, like you say, you had that experience where you felt yourself shut down. It was a very physical response to something external that had happened to you.
Yeah.
How does trauma then move through our body, and how can we help it to move through and to help our own healing?
Yeah, beautiful question. So how can we process it?
Yes,
How can we continue to grow and build resilience? So trauma, the important thing for us to understand is that when we talk about the mind, so we talk about mental illness and or mental health, and the trauma's impact creating mental health or mental illness. When we talk about the mind isn't the brain. The mind is the body, it's the heart, it's our relationships, it's our environment. So trauma in the body is a very real thing, which is why traditional talk therapies don't always work. And actually, the research is showing us that it can sometimes create more harm if all we do is talk about it. And the reason that trauma gets trapped in the body is it gets trapped in the nervous system. The nervous system is about our survival. And as I mentioned earlier, our nervous system starts to develop early in our childhood based on our caregivers and our environment and what's happening in the world and the minority we live in. Are we a woman? Are we of a different, different minority? They all contribute to the different factors, and so it gets trapped in our body because it had to at the time. It was there for survival. So it actually worked, right? It kept us safe. It helped us to survive. But then what happens is it gets covered and we don't deal with it. And so the way we can deal with it, the very best way is exercise. It's movement. We weren't born to sit at a desk. No. Again, our ancestors knew what they were doing when they were dancing, when they were running, when they were hugging each other, when they were, in chasing an animal. That's all moving the adrenaline and the stress caught in the nervous system through the bodies. Dancing is a brilliant way to do it. Breath work is also a fantastic exercise, although do that with some guidance because it can be incredibly powerful. And then we can also move it through different embodied psychotherapies. So things like EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, TRTP, the Richards trauma process, these kind of...
Can you talk a bit more? What's that one?
Yes, so TRTP was developed by a woman by the name of Judith Richards, and it's a hypnotherapeutic protocol, and it builds on the power of visualization and the impact of the mind-body, so the mind-body connection, and it helps people embody their stronger self, their wise self, their inner adult, which really is the healing model method, the secret sauce when it comes to trauma healing. It's about connection. And if the connection and the safety wasn't available when we were little, we can cultivate that for ourselves. And TRTP is one of the tools that can support us to do that.
Wow, that's fascinating. I love the idea of movement because it's, for me personally, really helped me a lot. And I think a lot of our audience listening, you might have had birth trauma or something that has happened to you in your childhood. But I do yoga and I freaking love it. It's the most amazing thing ever.
Christy, yoga, they knew what they were doing. And, our modern science is only just catching up to it.
Yes.
The world of mind-body medicine is exploding, and so it should be, because there's so much in there.
Yeah.
So yoga, cold showers are really cool.
Love a cold shower.
Yeah. So the cool thing about both exercise and cold showers is that we're teaching our bodies that even though there's the stress response, we're safe. So I often stand in the cold shower and I say, yes, this is very uncomfortable, but right now I'm safe. Right now I'm very safe. And so I'm just learning over and over again that I can manage discomfort, and that's what trauma teaches us we can't do when it happens to us.
Yeah. And so if we all feel trauma differently, do we all heal from trauma differently? We're talking about some people find movement helpful, cold showers. Is talking appropriate for everybody? Should we all be talking about it? Or is it not appropriate for everyone to make people talk?
Christy, I don't think anything's appropriate for everybody. I think we are finely tuned animals. We're unique and magical. And talking is incredibly powerful for many people, but for some people it might not be terribly useful, at least in the short term, at least following the immediate trauma. So back in the olden days, we used to do trauma when I say olden days, when I first started my career.
Not that long ago, Liv. You are an expert.
Many years ago, we used to do trauma debriefing, but the jury's still out now, and whether that's actually helpful, where we actually get people to relive and talk about it.
Yeah, wow.
Yes.
I know, because sometimes talking about it, you're reliving the trauma.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah,
might
it
not
can be
want to
re-traumatising.
Yeah, re-traumatising. But then sometimes you think, well, should I do that in order to move through it? Because everyone, I guess, when you have trauma, you want to move through it, or you want to heal from it, I think, really, isn't it?
And you want to get to that next point already. You don't want to have to go through the discomfort any longer. You just want to be at the other side.
Yes,
I think
because the trauma is the discomfort.
Yes.
So why should you make yourself feel even more discomfort trying to deal with it?
Yeah. And I think the power of talking is actually, as I said before, the power of connection. It's about being in a relationship with somebody, whether it's a therapist, a good friend, a partner. It's that power of connection and being heard and validated. That's the healing.
Yeah.
Oh, what happens then if a traumatic event happens and say that your kid hurts themselves, which happens, I think, to every parent along the parenting journey, and it's the worst ever when they very first hurt themselves, but you both experience it differently, or you both have different ways of coping.
Do you mean
trauma.
they're both parents?
Yeah. How do you cope with that?
It's the same way you'd cope with any difference in your marriage and in your parenting, I can imagine. It's through patience and questioning and understanding, physical touch. Physical touch is beyond words. So, we know that a 30-second hug engages oxytocin, so it settles the body. And so, that kind of thing can be really helpful. But it's about understanding and just understanding how we're all so different and we manage things differently. And I think removing the judgment, that's a key, right, wrong, good, bad, removing that.
Liv, so we've talked about how trauma is uncomfortable. Does time play a part in healing or not?
Oh, good question.
Good question. I think time plays yes. I think the answer would be yes. Time absolutely plays a part in healing, because as time goes on, we realise we have more resources and we gather more evidence. So our brilliant mind, which is a meaning-making machine and a storytelling wizard, it gathers more evidence that confirms our safety. It's adaptive. We can start to, we realise actually the trauma's over. That was then. This is now, we're safe now, which is where the power of mindfulness comes in too. It's being in that present moment, being here in the body right now.
Oh, so do we need trauma?
Do we need trauma?
To be better people.
To grow.
To make your brain grow and become more resilient.
It's a good question.
It'd be nice not to have it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'd rather have chocolate.
Yeah. And unicorns and rainbows.
Exactly.
That'd be nice. I think we need challenge. I don't know that we need trauma. I think we need challenge. We definitely need stresses. Did you know that if a tree... Did you hear about this amazing study? I won't go too long about it.
No,
but it's an amazing study where they actually found... They tried to replicate the Earth's atmosphere because the vision was to go and live on Mars. And so they did everything. They got the soil right and the air quality and the sun and the trees were growing. And then all of a sudden, the trees would get to a certain point and they'd all start to fall over. And the scientists were like, what on earth is going on? They realised they forgot to include wind in this atmosphere, and the trees need wind in order to have their roots grow strong. So they need the pressure of wind to hold it up. And it creates stronger wood. And it's the same with humans. We need challenge. We need stress. But it goes back to that Goldilocks principle. When we're little and we don't have all of our developed faculties, we don't have a prefrontal cortex, our nervous system is still being myelinated, so it's still growing, we can't cope with some of the significant events. They're too big. So I'd say we need challenge, we need stress. I'm not sure we need trauma, because trauma is when the system is overwhelmed. And it can't cope.
Well, then, if someone around us, a loved one or a friend, experiences trauma, how do we support them, help them move through it?
Well, it's probably when they do, right? Because it's not if, it's when. We've all had friends and ourselves and our partners. It's about exactly what you said before, Christy. It's about validation. It's being there. It's understanding. It's non-judgment. It's removing the expectations of healing. You know, you're on a time frame. Okay, your grief should have passed by now.
Yeah.
Come on, sort that out. No, it's about meeting them where they are, walking beside them, and by all means reminding them of all the resources they have. But we will all heal in our own time based on our genetics, our environment, the resources we have.
So will you heal if you don't go and talk to someone or you don't have movement? Or will trauma always stay in the body?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think everybody's going to find their own way, and maybe some people, healing's going to look different for everybody. So whatever healing looks like for you is likely to be different for me. And so I don't know that that's a yes or no answer. I wish it was.
What about with our kids, Liv? Because as we've said, you know, we all feel some form of trauma. If not, you know, right in this moment, then we have done or we will do. How do we stop our own traumas impacting our children? Whether it be, you know, that sense of overprotectiveness, perhaps, whether it be that, you know, that desire to want to fix everything for them. How do we actually sort of rein it in a little bit to just let our children grow like those trees, big and strong, with just enough, you know, so that they can grow those deep roots?
Awesome question. I would love to say that it's really easy. You know, Freya, I don't know that we can. I think that's part of the legacy.
Yeah.
But I think what we can do is we can invest time and effort and intention and care in our own healing. You know, I think one of the best things I started doing before I became a parent was meditating. And I don't know, I do know for sure my parenting journey and my kids would be very different had I not discovered mindfulness and meditation at the time I did, which was just before the birth of my first child. And so I think we work on ourselves. And the research tells us that a well parent is the most important thing that we can do, which is why I'm so delighted to be here, because I know that that's your vision. It's to support parents to be well and to thrive, to support the kids.
Yeah, and I think that's the power in saying, it's okay that this happened. Like, it's not okay that it happened, but I acknowledge that it happened. And like talking about this intergenerational trauma that's passed down is sometimes it's just the understanding of saying to your kids, this happened to mum or this happened to dad. And this is the way I am. And it's helping them understand mum might be triggered or dad might be triggered when this happened because this happened to us. And then it's sort of, I don't know, for me anyway, it sort of takes the edge off of it.
Yes.
Because it's not, oh, you're not snapping at me because of that, but you're snapping because, I don't know, you had a car accident. Now when you drive, sometimes you get a fright if someone comes. You might not have had that if that hadn't have happened, but now you understand that, you know, it's not personal.
Yeah, and through that you're modelling empathy, you're modelling compassion, understanding, incredibly powerful. And you're bringing them on the journey. And also I think as parents it's important that we make mistakes and we muck up, because that's how our kids build resilience. And it also is how they realise that they're not perfect humans.
Yes.
You know, I mean, imagine having to look at your parent who's polished and perfect and never has a tantrum or makes a mistake and think that's the way you're meant to be a human. No humans are like that.
They'd be exhausting as a child.
Yeah.
And the power of repair. I think that's the biggest thing I've got out of parenthood and listening to all our incredible experts is just the ability to go back and say, you know what, kid? Stuffed up. I had a bad day. I was grumpy. I was hungry. But you know what? I'm human. I love you. I'm sorry I was in a grump. This is why. I'll do better next time.
Really great day tomorrow.
Let's just all go to bed.
All go to bed and reset.
Well, you know, it's that's actually what my book's about. You Are Loved, which is exactly that.
Is that the title?
That's the title.
Love the title.
And it's exactly that, Christy. It's one of the pages is you are loved when we all feel mad, because I think as kids, and it's not our fault when we're kids, but we think the world's. I know.
That's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
That's beautiful.
We think the world's all about us, so we assume it's our fault that the parents are mad, but it's not. And if our kids can kind of connect with that, exactly what you just said, the love is always there. It's not negotiable. It can't be lessened. It's unconditional. And yes, I will have tantrums occasionally. And
human.
We're human, but the love is there. And I think that's almost how we resource our children throughout their life.
Oh, and that's the meaning of love. Someone loves you for all the bits that you hate about yourself, that's stuffed up. Someone else thinks, oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love it when you have that little tantrum.
Yeah.
So cute. It's kind of cute when your lip goes like that. Or
When you
sure,
make
my
that
husband
voice.
doesn't think that. But oh, Liv, thank you
So much for being here with us on the
Pleasure.
Expert Guide to Parenthood podcast. A huge thanks to Mistella for sponsoring this episode. Mistella empowers parents throughout their parenting journey with education and honest conversations from pregnancy and beyond. Mistella has plenty of parenting articles and resources on their website. Visit mistella.com.au. Mistella is our family's favourite. The Expert Guide to Parenthood podcast is brought to you by Parents You've Got This in partnership with Mistella. We are so delighted to bring you the very best experts talking about a full suite of topics that are really central to the parenting journey. If there are any topics you would like us to cover, please do reach out. Check out the Parents You've Got This masterclasses, and never forget, parents, you've got this.
Join a Parents You've Got This masterclass today to be prepared, excited and educated for pregnancy, birth, baby and parenthood. Visit www.parentsyou'vegotthis.com.au and sign up for a masterclass today.
The information provided in this podcast is general in nature and is intended to support, not replace, a discussion with your doctor or healthcare professional. Parents You've Got This take no responsibility for any medical decisions made by individuals based on the information provided in this podcast.